It seems to me that a massive disaster, a natural disaster on the one hand, or a human-made disaster, must bring about a couple of responses. One of them is a practical consideration. How could this have been prevented? How could we stop it happening again? And the other one is a matter of how we respond to it as human beings, and especially, for us, how we respond to it as people of faith, as people who say we follow Christ. And we have to be really careful here. We have to avoid religiosity. Religious language can be very problematic. You know, Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal Church and the Church of England, was a block away from the Twin Towers when 9/11 happened. And he said something very interesting. He said that the messages that were given to the hijackers before they chose to end their lives, and nearly 3,000 other lives, was strongly religious language. It was religiosity telling them what they may expect in their version of the afterlife. But the secular messages which were sent from those on the planes which were about to be crashed were messages of love, of compassion. They were messages shorn of religious language. They were messages which, even in extremis, took time to consider how the others that they loved were going to react and move on. How to make their loved ones, hundreds of thousands of miles away, feel some comfort, even as they went to their death. And it seemed to Rowan Williams that this ultimately should be what religious language is trying to do. And it's not good enough for us just to point at the language that was given to the hijackers and say, oh, well, that's Muslim, that's something unique to Islam, they're all like that. Well, they aren't all like that. Tiny fraction of them are all like that. It wasn't some enormous country, some world-spanning empire called Islam that attacked America 10 years ago. It was actually a handful of people, not using nuclear bombs or anything like that, but just with ill will, who chose to go through methods which were pretty much open to anybody, with security arrangements which were almost non-existent. And they chose to do what actually pretty much any one of you could have done if you'd have had the same will. It wasn't the actions of a world empire of hate. It was the actions of a few broken people. A few broken people. Using religious language to justify their murder. It's not good enough to point at Islam and say, oh, well, that's the thing, because we need to remember that actually it could just as easily have been Christian language. It often has been Christian language. It often is Christian language. Even at this moment, you know, we live in joyful ignorance of what's happening all around the world, so that when something happens to us that is dramatic and uniquely painful to us, it is as if it's the first time such a thing has ever happened. And the danger is there that we react in a way which is utterly isolationist, without any consideration to the fact that the rest of the world has experienced this and continues to experience it year after year after year. Even at this moment, there is an organization called the Lord's Resistance Army that dresses itself in the language of Christianity, that is led by somebody who believes that he is a prophet of the Holy Spirit. And the Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa, which receives very little publicity, has been responsible for the deaths of thousands and for the displacement of hundreds of thousands in recent years. Between 1997 and 2001 alone, 1,013 Mexicans were found dead along the border between this country and Mexico. In 1994, 800,000 people were slaughtered as we in the West, because we can't suddenly decide we're not going to be part of this when it becomes difficult. I can't suddenly separate myself from the Anglo-American world order when it becomes awkward and take a high moral tone and look down upon all those things that have been done that I disapprove of, because I'm a part of it. Any reaction to a horror like 9/11 must be a reaction of us, of we, where we must take ownership of everything that went before, that happened during, and happened afterwards, because we are a society of strong people. Strength can manifest itself with acts of great beauty, Christ-like acts. And we have been blessed to see some of those acts during the horrors that unfolded in New York on that day. But we have also realized that the acts of individual human beings can have terrifying and appalling consequences. It gives lie to the idea that what we do doesn't matter. It really does matter. One man, Osama bin Laden, started a chain of reactions which resulted in the deaths of thousands. One man, Jesus Christ, inspired a movement which sustains to this day. One man, Mahatma Gandhi, freed 1 billion people. One man, Martin Luther King Jr., started to unfurl a system of apartheid and oppression which had lasted for centuries. One man or one woman makes an enormous difference. Therefore, when we are tempted to think, what can I do? There is much that we can do. The lie we tell ourselves is that we are powerless. Weirdly and cruelly, the lesson of 9/11 is that we are not powerless. When we choose to be, we can have great power, for good or for ill, and it's our free will. On the day after 9/11, Rowan Williams, the same Archbishop, was walking through New York, and a young man came to him who was a pilot and a devout Roman Catholic and said, "Where the hell was God yesterday? Where the hell was God?" And Rowan Williams said, "I started with the usual stuff, the doctrine about human free will and how a God that disregards human free will makes creation utterly pointless. And I believe it, and I know it to be true. But doctrine doesn't comfort the heart that has been ripped out by a disaster like 9/11. The trouble is that after a disaster like 9/11, we are enormously susceptible to things a long way away from the reasonings of our brain. We are susceptible to men and women of ill will who would guide our anger and our shock and turn it against others for reasons of their own. I am not going to go on and on and on about the consequences of 9/11 elsewhere. But we have to be truthful. We have to be truthful. And consequently, it's important to put it in some sort of context. It's important to put it in a financial context and in the context of our actions. You know, there were 2,996 people killed on 9/11. 372 foreign nationals, 67 from Britain. That's the largest terrorist attack on the United Kingdom ever, and it happened in a foreign country, as well as citizens of 56 other countries. Since then, 7,502 soldiers have been killed from the US, the UK, and allies in Afghanistan and Iraq. 137,000 Iraqi and Afghani citizens have died for those 3,000. 137,000. And that's a conservative estimate put together by the United Nations and other